Ben laughed. Oh, you mean the smell? Yes, that's it, said Jacob eagerly. It was the smell. I draw mine face for that. Ha 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 ha! Roared Ben. That was a good one. A Dutch boy smell of cheese. You can never make me believe that. Well, it is no matter, replied Jacob, trudging on beside Ben in perfect good humour. Wait till you hit me cheese, huh? That is all. Soon he added pathetically, Benjamin, I no likes be called Dutch. That is no good. I be's a Hollander. Just as Ben was apologizing, Lambert hailed him. Hold up, Ben. Here's a fish market. There is not much to be seen at this season, but we can look at the storks if you wish. Ben knew the storks were held in peculiar reverence in Holland, that the bird figured upon the arms of the capital. He had noticed cartwheels placed upon the roofs of Dutch cottages to entice storks to settle upon them. He had seen their huge nests, too, on many a thatched gable roof, from Broek to the Hague. But it was winter now. The nests were empty. No greedy birdlings opened their mouths, or rather their heads, at the approach of a great white-winged thing with outstretched neck and legs, bearing a dangling something for their breakfast. The long bills were far away, picking up food on African shores. And before they would return in the spring, Ben's visit to the land of the dikes would be over. Therefore he pressed eagerly forward, as Van Monen led the way through the fish market, anxious to see if storks in Holland were anything like the melancholy specimens he had seen in the zoological gardens in London. It was the same old story. A tamed bird is a sad bird, say what you will. These storks lived in a sort of kennel, chained by the feet like felons, though supposed to be honored by being kept at the public expense. In summer, they were allowed to walk about the market, where the fish stalls were like so many free dining salons to them. Untasted delicacies, in the form of raw fish and the butcher's offals, lay about their kennels now, but the city guests preferred to stand upon one leg, curving back their long neck and leaning their heads sidewise in a blinking reverie. How gladly they would have changed their petted state for the busy life of some hard-working stork mother or father bringing up a troublesome family on the roof of a rickety old building, where flapping windmills frightened them half to death every time they ventured forth on a frolic. Ben soon made up his mind, and rightly too, that The Hague, with its fine streets and public parks, shaded with elms, was a magnificent city. The prevailing costume was like that of London or Paris, and his British ears were many a time cheered by the music of British words. The shops were different in many respects from those on Oxford Street and the Strand, but they often were illumined by a printed announcement in English, was spoken within. Others proclaimed themselves to have London stout for sale, and one actually promised to regale its customers with English roast beef. Over every possible shop was a never-failing placard, Tabak te koop, tobacco to be sold. Instead of colored glass globes in the windows or high jars of leeches, the drug stores had a gaping Turk's head at the entrance, or if the establishment were particularly fine, a wooden mandarin entire, indulging in a full yawn. Some of these queer faces amused Ben exceedingly. They seemed to have just swallowed a dose of psychic. But Van Monen declared he could not see anything funny about them. A druggist showed his sense by putting a gaper before his door, so that his place would be known at once as the apotheke. And that was all there was about it. Another attractive thing Ben saw was the milkmen's carts. These were small affairs, filled with shiny brass kettles or stone jars, and drawn by dogs. The milkman walked meekly beside his cart, keeping his dog in order and delivering the milk to customers. Certain fish dealers had dog carts also, and when a herring dog chanced to meet a milk dog, he invariably put on airs and growled as he passed him. Sometimes a milk dog would recognize an acquaintance before another milk cart across the street, and then how the kettle would rattle, especially if they were empty. Each dog would give a bound and, never caring for his master's whistle, insist upon meeting the other halfway. Sometimes they contented themselves with an inquisitive sniff, but generally the smaller dog made an affectionate snap at the larger one's ear, or a friendly tussle was engaged in by way of exercise. Then, woe to the milk kettles and woe to the dogs. The whipping over, each dog expressing his feelings as best he could, would trot leisurely back to his work. If some of the animals were eccentric in their ways, others were remarkably well behaved. In fact, there was a school for dogs in the city, established expressly for training them. Ben probably saw some of its graduates. Many a time he noticed a span of barkers trotting along the street with all the dignity of horses, obeying the slightest hint of the man walking briskly beside them. When their load was delivered, the dealer would jump in the cart and have a fine drive to his home beyond the gates of the city, and sometimes, I regret to say, a patient Frau would trudge beside the cart with a fish basket upon her head and a child in her arms, while her lord enjoyed his drive, carrying no heavier burden than a stumpy clay pipe, the smoke of which mounted lovingly into her face. The sightseeing came to an end at last, and so did our boys' visit to the Hague. They had spent 3 happy days and nights with the Van Gens, and, strange to say, had not once in all that time put on skates. The 3rd day had indeed been one of rest. The noise and bustle of the city was hushed. Sweet Sunday bells sent blessed, tranquil thoughts into their hearts. Ben felt, as he listened to their familiar music, that the Christian world is one, after all, however divided by sects and differences it may be. As a clock speaks everyone's native language in whatever land it may strike the hour, so church bells are never foreign if our hearts but listen. Led on by those clear voices, our party, with Mevrouw Van Gent and her husband, trod the quiet but crowded streets until they came to a fine old church in the southern part of the city. The interior was large, and notwithstanding its great stained windows seemed dimly lighted, though the walls were white, and dashes of red and purple sunshine lay brilliantly upon pillar and pew. Ben saw a few old women moving softly through the aisles, each bearing a high pile of foot stoves, which he distributed among the congregation by skillfully slipping out the under one until none were left. It puzzled him that mein Herr should settle himself with the boys in the comfortable side pew after seating his Frau in the body of the church, which was filled with chairs exclusively appropriated to the women. But Ben was learning only a common custom of the country. The pews of the nobility and the dignitaries of the city were circular in form, each surrounding a column. Elaborately carved, they formed a massive base to their great pillars standing out in bold relief against the blank white walls beyond. These columns, lofty and well-proportioned, were nicked and defaced from violence done to them long ago. Yet it seemed quite fitting that before they were lost in the deep arches overhead, their softened outlines should leaf out as they did into richness and beauty. Soon, Ben lowered his gaze to the marble floor. It was a pavement of gravestone. Nearly all the large slabs of which it was composed marked the resting places of the dead. An armorial design engraved upon each stone with inscription and date told whose form was sleeping beneath, and sometimes 3 of a family were lying one above the other in the same sepulchre. He could not but think of the solemn funeral procession winding by torchlight through those lofty aisles, and bearing its burden silently toward a dark opening whence the slab had been lifted in readiness for its coming. It was something to feel that his sister Mabel, who died in her flower, was lying in a sunny churchyard where a brook rippled and sparkled in the daylight, and waving trees whispered together all night long, where flowers might nestle close to the headstone, and the moon and stars shed their peace upon it, and morning birds sing sweetly overhead. Then he looked up from the pavement and rested his eyes upon the carved oaken pulpit, exquisitely beautiful in its design and workmanship. He could not see the minister, though not long before he had watched him slowly ascending its winding stair, a mild-faced man wearing a ruff about his neck and a short cloak reaching nearly to the knee. Meantime, the church had been silently filling. Its pews were somber with men, and its center radiant with women in their fresh Sunday attire. Suddenly, a soft rustling spread through the building. All eyes were turned toward the minister, now appearing above the pulpit. Although the sermon was spoken slowly, Ben could understand little of what was said. But when the hymn came, he joined in with all his heart. 1,000 voices lifted in love and praise offered a grander language than he could readily comprehend. Once he was startled during a pause in the service by seeing a little bag suddenly shaken before him. It had a tinkling bell at its side, and was attached to a long stick carried by one of the deacons of the church. Not relying solely upon the mute appeal of the poor boxes fastened to the columns near the entrance, the more direct method was resorted to of awaking the sympathies of the charitable. Fortunately, Ben had provided himself with a few stivers, or the musical bag must have tinkled before him in vain. More than once, a dark look rose on our English boy's face that morning. He longed to stand up and harangue the people concerning a peculiarity that filled him with pain. Some of the men wore their hats during the service, or took them off whenever the humor prompted, and many put theirs on in the church as soon as they rose to leave. No wonder Ben's sense of propriety was wounded, and yet a higher sense would have been exercised had he tried to feel willingly that Hollanders should follow the customs of their country. But his English heart said over and over again, "It is outrageous. It is sinful." There is an angel called Charity, who often would save our hearts a great deal of trouble if we would but let her in. On Monday morning, bright and early, our boys bade farewell to their kind entertainers and started on their homeward journey. Peter lingered a while at the lion-guarded door, for he and his sisters had many parting words to say. As Ben saw them bidding each other good-bye, he could not help feeling that kisses as well as clocks were wonderfully alike everywhere. The English kiss that his sister Jenny gave him when he left home had said the same to him that the Frau von Gen's Dutch kiss said to Peter. Ludwig had taken his share of the farewell in the most matter-of-fact manner possible, and though he loved his sister well, had winced a little at her making such a child of him as to put an extra kiss for mother upon his forehead. He was already upon the canal with Karl and Jacob. Were they thinking about sisters or kisses? Not a bit of it. They were so happy to be on skates once more, so impatient to dart at once into the very heart of Broek, that they spun and wheeled about like crazy fellows, relieving themselves meantime by muttering something about Peter and Donder, not worth translating. Even Lambert and Ben, who had been waiting at the street corner, began to grow impatient, and the captain joined them at last. They were soon on the canal with the rest. "Hurry up, Peter," growled Ludwig. "We're freezing by inches there. I knew you'd be the last after all to get on your skates." "Oh, did you?" said his brother, looking up with an air of deep interest. "A clever boy." Ludwig laughed, but tried to look cross as he said, "I'm in earnest. We must get home sometime this year." "Now, boys," cried Peter, springing up as he fastened the last buckle, "there's a clear way before us. We will imagine it's the grand race. Ready? 1, 2, 3, start!" I assure you, very little was said for the first half hour. There were 6 Mercuries skimming the ice. In plain English, they went like lightning. No? That is imaginary, too. The fact is, one cannot decide what to say when half a dozen boys are whizzing past at such a rate. I can only tell you that each did his best, flying with bent body and eager eyes in and out among the placid skaters on the canal, until the very guards shouted to them, "Hold up!" This only served to send them onward with two-boy power and startled all the beholders. But the laws of inertia were stronger even than canal guards. After a while, Jacob slackened his speed, then Ludwig, then Lambert, then Karl. They soon halted to take a long breath, and finally found themselves standing in a group, gazing after Peter and Ben, who were still racing in the distance, as if their lives were at stake. "It is very evident," said Lambert, as he and the 3 companions started on again, "that neither of them will give up until he can't help it." "What foolishness," growled Karl, "to tire themselves at the beginning of the journey. But they're racing in earnest, that's certain. Hello! Peter's flagging." "Not so," cried Ludwig. "Catch him being beaten." "Ha, ha," sneered Karl. "I tell you, boy, Benjamin is ahead." Now, if Ludwig disliked anything in the world, it was to be called a boy, probably because he was nothing else. He grew indignant at once. "Hump! What are you, I wonder? There, sir! Now look and see if Peter isn't ahead." "I think he is," interposed Lambert, "but I can't quite tell at this distance." "I think he isn't," retorted Karl. Jacob was growing anxious. He always abhorred an argument, so he said in a coaxing tone, "Don't quarrel. Don't quarrel." "Don't quarrel," mocked Karl, looking back at Jacob as he skated. "Who's quarreling, Poot?" "You're a goose." "I can't help that," was Jacob's meek reply. "See, they're nearing the turn of the canal." "Now we can see," cried Ludwig in great excitement. "Peter will make it first, I know." "He can't, for Ben is ahead," insisted Karl. "Gunst! That ice boat will run over him. No, he's clear. They're a couple of geese, anyhow. Hurrah! They're at the turn. Who's ahead?" "Peter!" cried Ludwig joyfully. "Good for the captain!" shouted Lambert and Jacob. And Karl condescended to mutter, "It is Peter, after all. I thought all the time that head fellow was Ben." This turn in the canal had evidently been their goal, for the 2 racers came to a sudden halt after passing it. Karl said something about being glad that they had sense enough to stop and rest, and the 4 boys skated on in silence to overtake their companions. All the while, Karl was secretly wishing that he had kept on with Peter and Ben, for he felt sure he could easily have come out winner. He was very rapid, though by no means a graceful skater. Ben was looking at Peter with mingled vexation, admiration, and surprise as the boys drew near. They heard him saying in English, "You're a perfect bird on the ice, Peter Van Holt. You're the first fellow that ever beat me in a fair race, I can tell you." Peter, who understood the language better than he could speak it, returned a laughing bow at Ben's compliment, but made no further reply. Possibly he was scant of breath at the time. "Now, Benjamin, what you do with yourself? Get so hot as a firebrick. Das is no good," said Jacob's plaintive comment. "Nonsense," answered Ben. "This frosty air will cool me soon enough. I'm not tired." "You are beaten, though, my boy," said Lambert in English, "and fairly, too. How will it be, I wonder, on the day of the grand race?" Ben flushed and gave a proud, defiant laugh. as if to say, "This was mere pastime. I am determined to beat then, come what will." By the time the boys reached the village of Voorhout, which stands near the Grand Canal, about halfway between The Hague and Haarlem, they were forced to hold a council. The wind, though moderate at first, had grown stronger and stronger, until at last they could hardly skate against it. The weather vanes throughout the country had evidently entered into a conspiracy. "No use trying to face such a blow as this," said Ludwig. "It cuts its way down a man's throat like a knife." "Shut your mouth, then," grunted the affable Karl, who was strong-chested as a young ox. "I'm for keeping on." "In this case," interposed Peter, "we must consult the weakest of the parties rather than the strongest." The captain's principle was right, but his application was not flattering to Master Ludwig. Shrugging his shoulders, he retorted, "Who's weak? Not I, for one, but the wind's stronger than any of us. I hope you'll condescend to admit that." "Ha, ha!" laughed Van Moonen, who could hardly keep his feet. "So it is." Just then the weather vanes telegraphed to each other by a peculiar twitch, and in an instant the gust came. It nearly threw the strong-chested Karl. It almost strangled Jacob, and quite upset Ludwig. "Now that settles the question," said Peter. "Off with your skates. We'll go into Voorhout." At Voorhout they found a little inn with a big yard. The yard was well bricked, and better than all, was provided with a complete set of skittles. So our boys soon turned the detention into a frolic. The wind was troublesome, even in that sheltered quarter, but they were on good standing ground and did not mind it. First, a hearty dinner, then the game, with pins as long as their arms and balls as big as their heads, plenty of strength left for rolling, and a clean sweep of 60 yards for the strokes. No wonder they were happy. That night, Captain Peter and his men slept soundly. No prowling robber came to disturb them, and as they were distributed in separate rooms, they did not even have a bolster battle in the morning. Such a breakfast as they ate! The landlord looked frightened. When he had asked them where they belonged, he made up his mind that the Broek people starved their children. It was a shame, such fine young gentlemen, too. Fortunately, the wind had tired itself out and fallen asleep in the great sea cradle beyond the dunes. There were signs of snow. Otherwise, the weather was fine. It was mere child's play for the well-rested boys to skate to Leyden. Here they halted a while, for Peter had an errand at the Golden Eagle. He left the city with a lighted heart. Dr. Boykman had been at the hotel, read the note containing Hans's message, and departed for Broek. "I cannot say it was your letter sent him off so soon," explained the landlord. "Some rich lady in Broek was taken bad very sudden, and he was sent for in haste." Peter turned pale. "What was the name?" he asked. "Indeed, it went in one ear and out the other. For all I hindered it. Plague to people who can't see a traveller comfortable in lodgings. They must whisk him off before one can breathe." "A lady in Broek, did you say?" "Yes," very gruffly. "Any other business, young master?" "No, mine host, except that I and my comrades here would like a bite of something and a drink of hot coffee." "Ah," said the landlord sweetly, "a bite you shall have, and coffee too, the finest in Leyden. Walk up to the stove, my masters. Now I think again. That was a widow lady from Rotterdam, I think they said, visiting at one Van Stoepel's, if I mistake not." "Ah," said Peter, greatly relieved. "They live in the White House by the Slossen Mill. Now, mynheer, the coffee, please." What a goose I was, he thought, as the party left the Golden Eagle, to feel so sure it was my mother. But she may be somebody's mother, poor woman, for all that. Who can she be, I wonder?